without the high-grade pepper.
He could recite the telephone book and people would be fascinated.
Lecture man, very well-read man, and you feel a little bit small, I think.
Tom, can we just comb you? Oh, darling, no, sorry, I'm too busy, I'm saving the universe.
Something that Garbo-like has kept itself shrouded in mystery for the better part of life.
He is an alien. Tom Baker was born an alien.
Larger than life, manic. He's like Eddie Izzard on speed. You know.
The atmosphere on Doctor Who with Tom could be fraught.
There's a faint loneliness about him and a sort of a power.
Good morning, good morning. Is it a good morning? Yes, it is. It's a wonderful morning. You know,
When Tom started the role, it was 1974. It was 10 years after the programme had begun. It would be nearly 10 years before it came to an end. He occupies that huge sort of central ground there. He is the icon. He is for so many people Doctor Who. There is simply no other. I think he occupies that big space. If you ask anyone to identify Doctor Who, they don't identify William Hartnell, they don't identify Patrick Troughton, they identify the guy with the long scarf, big curly hair and jelly babies.
He was brilliant. He was never less than brilliant.
He was my hero, and still is.
He's very much like a father figure, I think, to millions of people.
I was sort of early teens and Tom was just incredible, this sort of anti-establishment figure, full of energy, bouncing around, sort of like Tigger personified. He was an incredible performance.
I know Barry saw an enormous number of people, you know, because that's the most important decision you make, is in casting the Doctor, getting the right Doctor. And he saw a lot of people on the terms of, not I am offering you this job, but would you like to come and talk to me to see whether you and I both think you would like this job you do? And he saw a lot of people with kind of that in mind. Nobody he felt was quite right, and then somebody, I think from somebody within the BBC, suggested Tom Baker as a possibility. And Tom was then appearing in a movie called something like Son of Sinbad or The Seventh Adventure of Sinbad, one of those. It was a Hollywood Eastern, you know, Caliphs and Rajas and Wicked Viziers and all that stuff. And Barry and I went round to see it at the Hammersmith Odeon. And Tom was playing the Wicked Magician or something. He was playing the bad guy. But it was a very good, strong performance, you know, and Barry liked it, and I liked it, we both liked it very much. And from then on, Barry got into contact with Tom, who I think was then working on a building site, or so he said, you know, in one of his resting periods, you might call it. And it all kind of went on from there.
Well, first of all, I didn't know. I knew John was leaving before he actually left. Even when I joined, I knew that he was going. And then all these names kept being put into the melting pot. I think Jim Dale was mentioned, Ron Moody, and then Barry Letts, the director, came rushing in one day, said, wonderful, he said, we've got Tom Baker. And in my ignorance, I didn't know who Tom Baker was. So I had nothing to sort of gauge it by. And the first time I actually saw Tom was when we were filming Spiders, and we were filming John Dr. Demise. And it was the takeover. So it wasn't a time to really say very much. John was in his own little box with I am leaving, and the scene was meant to be quite upsetting. Liz as Sarah had to be upset that she thought Dr. John was dying. And all I did was hello, shake hands and lay down, goodbye, off. And then that night I had to go down to film with them. I'd finished the studio, but I was also filming with Tom. And I really wanted, you have to, if something works well, I think you get that extra frisson on screen, you see it. And I thought, it's so important, I mustn't push anything. You know, it has to come naturally. And Ian Marter was there with Tom when I went down filming. And they seemed already to have a really lovely relationship. And I actually felt very excluded. And I thought, well, I just have to sit back and wait on this. And everyone was sort of very, very low-key, and everyone had a job to do. But from the word go, it was new, very, very new Doctor, which was lovely. Because you are only as good as the people you work with. And the Doctor makes the running. It's like in a George Formby scene. You can't have 10 George Formbys. It wouldn't work. So all I could do was wait to see what Tom gave me, be the Sarah that John knew. And then when Tom came along, and he gave me this whole new scope of Sarah. Whereas John's Doctor had been very protective, arm around the chick. Tom's Doctor was, well, you know, just get out. You can do it. Do it. Oh, right, thanks, Doctor. And it was wonderful. Now, Tom comes from Liverpool, as I do, so I don't know if there was there's meant to be a Liverpool humour. He's so funny. And he is so generous and disarming, and it was great.
What we were looking for always was this star quality thing, which is not necessarily linked with good, great or even good acting, though it can be, but it's a separate thing. I mean, Tom himself, in a way, summed it up about John, in which he said he was like a very tall light bulb, you know, which is lovely because, and the thing is that when Pertwee was on the screen, you watched him, you know. And John, bless him, although he was a good actor, was not, you know, in some ways the greatest actor in the world, but he had this charisma. And that, you know, if you get him being a good actor, which I think Tom is, you know, that's a bonus. But that's not what you go for first, you know, you don't really want Alec Guinness, you know, or something like that. You want somebody who's going to knock your eye out the minute he comes on. And Tom has got this kind of enormous vitality about him, which is there in real life. And I think that's really what was the deciding factor, you know, as much as anything else. You know, he's very tall, he's got these curly hair, he's got these wide staring blue eyes, you know. And the general sort of innocent at large air, you know. I always used to say, you know, if you'd say to Tom, you know, something like good morning, he'd say, good morning, good morning. Is it a good morning? Yes, it is, it's a wonderful morning, you know, and all this would come across at you, you know, and that was really the quality we were after. And I was able from the beginning to write it into the script of The New Doctor. And the thing, of course, obviously about Robot is it's a regeneration story when you've got the Doctor for the first time. And what I used was this quality that when the Doctor first comes out of regeneration, he's a bit unbalanced in one way or another. And so I made him actually kind of quite wild and eccentric and very, very strange. You know, I mean, the scenes where he's tiptoeing about in his nightgown, you know, trying to find the TARDIS, or the scenes with Harry where Harry Sullivan tries to get him to go back to bed, you know. And it was you know, and I think Tom comes across, you know, really, really well in those scenes, you know. And I thought if they feel it's too extreme, they can calm him down a bit afterwards, which I think they did. But I wrote him very eccentric and very strange to begin with in the first story.
You get some of them when they start are encouraged to do, oh, play yourself, play yourself, play yourself. But I think, you know, when you get to the last episode, Sylvester McCoy, you know, he starts off doing that, but it's only to fill a vacuum. But eventually they find a particular way of writing for the character and so on. But I think Tom wrote himself. I think, you know, something really special happened there. Something you're not going to see very often. I mean, that was unique, you know. I don't think you're going to get that blurring of the two very often ever again, really.
It just worked, and it just got better and better and better. And by the time we came to do Planet of Evil, I think it was, we knew we were really flying. You just had that feel. I don't know where it came from. The people around you, the technicians, anyone, you just knew all of a sudden this was really good. And that is a very, very rare feeling. And when something is really good, you dare to be brave, you dare to make mistakes, and by that you get a better result because you're just braver. You trust the people around you.
The first impression of Tom was, what I particularly remember with a great deal of pleasure, is that we used to go out in the town sometimes together after rehearsal. And he came and stayed the night with me once, as a matter of fact, because at that time I think he was a bit peripatetic and didn't have any particular place in mind to go that we didn't want to. And so he came to stay the night with me, and I brought him back. I think my wife was in bed, or wasn't. I can't remember whether she. Anyway, I said, "Come on, Tom, come and stay the night." And the kids sort of rushed into the bathroom first thing in the morning to be faced by Tom in the bath. You know, didn't face Tom at all. He sort of big grin, and the children came in, you know, and sort of a little puzzled because they'd gone to bed by the time we got back, and a little puzzled by this, but took it in their stride eventually. That's my first fond memory of Tom, is the fact that. He and I were seen in various hostelries from time to time. But what I like very much also, I think it was great fun in Robot indeed, and he came out in all the different costumes. This one, that one. And the Briggs were saying, no, I don't think so, or yes, or no, I'm sure he said no to all of the Briggs probably. So that was my first memory of Tom.
Throughout his first season, you can sense that he's being written for. although there is certainly a lot of leeway being given for him to sort of fill in a lot of blanks and so on. But there comes a point where you move beyond like this completely fictional construction, and you get a sort of edge being brought to it. There's a big speech in his fourth story, which is Genesis of the Daleks, which has become which is a big favourite of all the fans. It's one of those pivotal moments where he's asking if he has the right to destroy the Daleks. And if you look at that, you can sort of sense there's something special coming along here. So this is something that, you know, William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton and John Pollock would never have done. The first, second and third would never have done. They'd never have actually questioned their motives and their ethics.
I can remember meeting Tom in the foyer of BBC Television Centre just after I'd finished writing Robot and delivered the scripts, you know, and Tom had read them and was sort of coming up to rehearsals, you know. And I met him, you know, I was obviously wondering how, you know, people were going to feel about it. And he said, I like your script very much. And I said, you know, for some reason, oh, well, I suppose you had to say that. And he said, no, I didn't. I didn't have to say it. I do like them, you know. And he was, you know, and he was very good in that first part, you know.
Well, I was born in 1934 in Liverpool, so I was a child at the outbreak of war. My father was in the services during the whole war, and I spent my childhood not going to school very much because of the war. Liverpool was one of the cities that was bombed, and that was really about it. No achievement in education at all, none at all. And I think it was my lack of achievement in education that made me restless to try and go in some other direction, because in those days, as to some extent now, but more so in those days, the only way out for poor families was through education. And with no educational achievement, I was really hidebound and had to find some other way. My mother was very religious, and somebody came to school one day looking for heroes, asking for people who wanted to do splendid and fine things, and I put my hand up. I always wanted to do something fine and splendid, and that led me into a monastery. With movies, the first movie I ever did, I don't think it was ever released. The first movie I ever did was in the 60s sometime. It was called A Winter's Tale. It was a film of the Shakespeare play. Lawrence Harvey was a star, and I played the bear. And nothing much happened to that. But that was an accident. It was a very successful stage play that an American organization attempted to turn into a film. It didn't really work out. That's how I got started. When I got the part, there was no rush for the designs to come through, and the designer became a friend of mine, and we used to go out for weeks, about 5 or 6 weeks. We used to go out and play, dressing up in various costumiers in London at the BBC. We had access to all those places, and we used to go out and we weren't rushing it, and we used to dress up and I used to dance about, and Jim was amused, Jim Atchison was amused, and finally emerged this sort of end of a century, slightly boho, crazy costume, which we liked. The scarf was a delicious little accident of us buying too much wool, and the lady was so excited to be working with the BBC, the lady we hired after we'd chosen the colours, knitted up all the wool. We didn't know anything about wool or knitting, and when we got to pick up the scarf, it was 20 feet long, and another little accident, and that stuck. So I did have lots of problems with the scarf. I kept falling over, or people used to think it was a tremendous wheeze to stand on my scarf when someone shouted action. And of course in wet weather it used to get longer. But the BBC never left in the tripping up sequences. I regret that. I've been keen on crossword puzzles for a long time. I'm not very good at them, but I'm very enthusiastic, and I particularly like doing them with a loving friend. And one day, the Times crossword is the puzzle that everyone does in England. Not everyone, but that's the puzzle. A lot of actors do it. Actors are very good at crossword puzzles because they spend so much time standing about. And one day I was waiting for the setup, and I was actually sitting down in a country road. with the dog K9 next to me, and I was doing the Times crossword puzzle, and I knew that John Leeson, my chum who did the voiceover, was actually in a scanner wagon. And quite innocently, I said to him, "Do you think that 1 across is an anagram?" And John, being much cleverer and quicker than I am, answered in the voice of K9 and gave me what 1 across was. And then he told me about 1 down, and he got a quote from Twelfth Night or something. And a group of people standing around were simply stupefied by this. People are really very easily influenced. We should have filmed that.
So I was absolutely petrified. I remember very clearly my journey on the tube the morning of the first day. And sitting there, I have never been so frightened and excited in my life. And I remember arriving at the read-through, and Tom was late. And so we were all sitting around the table waiting for the read-through to begin. And he stalked in his Mac, in his brown Mac. And I was physically shaking. It was extraordinary, extraordinarily frightening, surreal. It was a surreal first day to be in Doctor Who. But maybe, as Doctor Who is so surreal itself, that's not a bad tenor to approach it with.
You didn't almost have to finish sentences. We would put little things in. Tom would say, we would rehearse. By the time we came to the studio, we had to know exactly what we were doing, exactly where the marks were, exactly how many seconds to pause, because the thing that was really important was the special effects. You can do a scene 20, 30 times, you can be wonderful. If the stun gun doesn't work, you ain't got nothing. So you knew the shot they would take would be the one where, you know, if it was a special effect, that would work. So you were on the ball, but Tom used to say, "Oh, sir," so he'd look up to the director's box, he said, "Call them sir, they like that." So, now, Liz and I have just thought of that, and he'd say, "Oh, lovely idea, Tom. No, sorry," it used to come down through the floor manager's thing. No, Tom, it's a wonderful idea. I'm afraid we haven't got time." All right, and he'd say, "Come on, we'd do it, but we had to get it right if we did it." A point, an example, was in Pyramids of Mars. Do you remember in the Marx Brothers film, 3 Marx Brothers come along, they see something, and they simultaneously all turn around and just walk out of shot again. I don't know what I mean. Walk in, turn, walk out. And we did that in Pyramids of Mars when we saw something in one of the tunnels. It was meant to be a mini scene there, and say, "Oh, Sarah, quick, hide." And Tom said, "Oh, I'm not saying that bloody line again." In, turn, and it had to be timed. And, you know, yes, it was accepted, yes, it was very good, but if we got it wrong, it wouldn't have been very popular, because the clock ticks around, it waits for no man. And you only have till 10 o'clock, or in those days too. We used to do a record from 7:30 at night till 10 o'clock at night. So it was rather like curtain up. You didn't do rehearse record when I worked on it. In the olden days, they did latterly.
Tom doesn't take prisoners. And the fact that I was this, no doubt, immensely irritating, but sweet and, I think, unaffected kid, he didn't give me any leeway at all. It was the most terrifying day of my life. And I wanted him to be really, I wanted him to love me. I wanted him to think, "Oh, what a wonderful boy. Oh, what a gifted lad. Oh, you're totally..." I've never wanted anybody to like me so much in my entire life. "Oh, please like me, Tom." And that first day, he didn't really speak to me. He was he stalked into this rehearsal to this read-through late, and sat there in his brown raincoat and read the thing and smoked cigarettes. Chain smoked, if I remember right, I don't know. And I was actually terrified, but because of the Geoffrey Menard thing, it also seemed to me like it sort of confirming the sort of glamour of it as well. I think it would be appalled to hear me say this, but to me, as a sort of middle-class kid, middle-class sort of kid from Commuterville, there's just unbelievably... You know, I'd never been away from my parents more than 2 weeks at a time. And there I was working with this frightening man, tall, larger-than-life man. And as I say, on the first day, he really didn't acknowledge me very much. I tried to stand near him in the pub. I remember he went to the pub in lunchtime, so I went to the pub in the lunch. I said, "I thought, oh, he's going to the pub, well, I'll go to the pub. Tom goes to the pub, I'll do." And I stood at the pub, wanting him to see me. And I think I sort of edged sort of a little nearer along the bar, so I was sort of only 2 people away from him, standing there, you know, sort of, "Here I am, Tom Baker, you going to say hello to me?" And he didn't anyway, and so I went back. And we got back to rehearsal. And we had to do a scene together. He said, hello, I haven't said hello to you, have I? And I said, hello, hi. I thought, I said hello, he likes me. He smiled at me. That's a Tom Baker smile. And, oh, fab, he likes me, oh great. And then I made some suggestion about something, or so I had some thought. I said, oh, why don't we try that? And he said, look, why don't you piss off? I thought, oh, that's not a very good start, is it? Oh, he doesn't like me after all. So I went home, sort of distraught. Oh, God, he doesn't like my hero, he's my favourite actor in the world. He doesn't like me, he thinks I'm horrible. So that was my first day.
I mean, when he sees me in the kilt, which is, and Liz and Tom collapse with laughter, Brigham's kilt.
I think you can see how well received Tom was in the States when you look at the TV movie that was made last year with American backing to try and relaunch the series. If you look at Paul McGann's characterisation, it's so much like Tom. It's like an updated Tom, like the Tim Burton Batman was to the 60s TV series Batman. It's that sort of just almost a little bit sort of grim, a little bit gritty, a little bit sort of harder in many respects without those sort of campy edges. But you've still got the sort of the glittering, darting sort of intellect. You've still got the little moments, the little sort of there's a bit where he suddenly sort of runs off after his own shoes, that sort of thing. And it's that's so much like Tom, and I can't believe that's no coincidence. I can't believe that's no coincidence. I think there's something about Tom that became fundamentally associated with the character of the Doctor himself, and I think that's why he tends to overshadow everything else. Because, if Doctor Who was real, he'd be very like Tom Baker. I'm quite sure of that.
An awful lot of it was fun, the just process of working and helping on a bit on the script, trying to make the script work. I was the weekly reference point for the new directors. So it was all fun being Doctor Who. I think that the one thing that I miss about it, not here actually, because to some extent it still holds here, but in the United Kingdom where I'm beginning to be forgotten, which doesn't grieve me, that's the way it goes, sometimes you're something popular. The sweetest thing of it all was that for a period of 5 years or so, I was maybe the only man in England that don't talk to strange men didn't apply to. I had a marvelous instant intimacy with small children, which probably will never happen to me again. That was the sweetest thing. Actors have to grit their teeth, and you can't sit on a success. You've got to branch out somewhere else. It's not like being an accountant or something like that, where you rise in the corporation and get to the top that way. You get to the top as an actor. As a performer, by branching out, you can't play safe. The minute you play safe, you're taking the terrible risk that finally you'll fall into that sort of vacuum of safety, and away will go your nerve or your desire for insecurity. I think there's an incipient desire to be insecure in every performer, really. Doctor Who screenplay is just in abeyance in an office in London because we never did raise the money and nobody was impressed with the screenplay except me, which disappointed me. I collaborated with a friend of mine to do a children's film called Operation Charlie Boy, which I brought to America, but I didn't suppose I'd have time to show it to anyone. It was about children making a stance against pollution, and I thought it was funny and grotesque, and no one else seems all that impressed, but never mind, something might happen to it. Well, I went straight from Doctor Who to play Oscar Wilde at the Chichester Festival in England, which is a big cultural event, and the trials of Oscar Wilde, it wasn't really a play so much as a theatrical adaptation made from transcripts of the trial. That was something of a success, actually. We could have taken it into the West End, but it didn't please me enough to do that. And then I went from that to something I've often wanted to do, which is to play Long John Silver in Treasure Island. That was fun. That went quite well, too. Then I did Judge Brack in Hedda Gabler. That was the first Ibsen I'd ever played. That was a failure, actually. Although I escaped by the skin of my teeth, by my sheer effrontery, I suppose. Playing Judge Brack is a good part, but the production was considered a failure and we closed early. And then I did Sherlock Holmes for the BBC. And then latterly, at the end of last year, I've toured for about 20 weeks with the Royal Shakespeare Company in a contemporary play by Willie Russell called Educating Rita, which has just been filmed, I believe, with Michael Caine and Julie Walters. And that was fun in the provinces. That was a good play, a good production, and I was working with a comet of an actress called Kate Fitzgerald. Excellent, excellent. We did well. I don't think that I have anything original to observe about the difference between television and film, but it is obvious, isn't it, that television taking place practically by definition in a domestic context is more potent in the sense that that it happens in private, you see. While the movies happen in the dark, it really is a collective experience. It's private in the sense that you're in the dark, but you're conscious of other people. There's a formality of going out to the movies, about getting into a car or paying at the cash desk. When you're watching something on television, the extraordinary thing is there are so many other things going on sometimes, so that maybe therefore a particular moment isn't potent, but I mean, you can listen to television in your own home without any clothes on, when you're totally drunk or drugged, or making love, or washing dishes, or having a row, or discussing a marriage settlement. And I think also at certain times, because it happens in the privacy of one's own home, I think frequently one watches television, one's critical faculties are slightly lowered, and therefore it can penetrate you. See, the formality of going out to a doctor or to the cinema or to the theatre strengthens your resolve slightly. I don't mean by that it makes you incapable of being moved or touched, by no means. But when one is alone, television gets to an awful lot of isolated and lonely people, a lot of unhappy people, and a lot of people who are tired. And it's very penetrating and insidious. I sometimes find myself being quite touched at something, and I have to blink and pull myself together and say, this is absolute rubbish, you know. It is subverting me. And then I go out and have a drink and get subverted in some other way. CBS and an Italian company called Re Productions are doing an 8-hour television film on Christopher Columbus, and I am being considered for that. Apparently I'm being hotly considered for it. And I go back next week. I go to Los Angeles next week and then on back to England to meet these people, I think on the 8th or 9th. And then they'll show me the script. I'm extremely skeptical, actually, that they'll get out a good script on Christopher Columbus. It's a hard subject to realize. A lot of stuff is hearsay or it's just letters or whatever. It'll be really hard to get away from the sort of wooden costume pieces which so predominate when they attempt those subjects in film or television. It's hard, really, to get the conflict, the anxiety of Columbus. But if it's decent, even if it's halfway decent, I don't mind giving it a go. It'd take a long time, though. It would take about 8 months to film. That would be my first co-production, yes. Yeah. No. Never been asked. Mind you, had I been asked, most of the stuff I've seen on American television, I'd have thrown it back in their faces.
That was part of my next question.
Oh, what? I'd rather be a journalist than do some of the stuff I see on American television. Except when I see journalists on television, then I'd sometimes rather be dead. Not much, no. I mean, I admire it in some ways. For example, the quantity and the dilemma of the production of television in this country is immensely more complicated than it is in the UK. And so, to some extent, I suppose the achievement is